Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming. It's so encouraging to see so many students taking notes. I presume you're not all writing love letters for the weekend. But it is encouraging. You've probably heard that the definition of a mathematics lecture is a process whereby the notes of the professor in his notebook are transferred to the notes in the student's notebook without passing through the mind of either. But I'm totally convinced, looking at you and your assiduousness, that that is not happening here. I'm also grateful to the Pensmore Foundation in general and to Steve Huff in particular for honouring me with the invitation to come here. Pensmore, as you can see, is derived from the French penser, to think. And it's to think more. And I think it's enormously important in the debate in which we all stand that Christians are characterized by thinking more, not by thinking less. We have a lot to live down in that respect, because it has not always been the case that Christians have distinguished themselves by outthinking those who would oppose them. So the name Pensmore, I think, encapsulates everything that we're about at this conference. Now, we have heard two talks this afternoon, and my talk will inevitably overlap a bit, but you know, hearing ideas a number of times is very good for you. I had chicken dinner tonight. I had chicken at lunchtime as well. And funnily enough, tonight's having chicken didn't disturb me at all, because I can enjoy chicken twice. And similarly, ideas, ladies and gentlemen, especially powerful ideas, need to be heard many times before you can assimilate them sufficiently to be able to use them and repeat them. Many of the ideas we're talking about are at one level simple, but at another level they're not simple because people do not see them. And so I make no apology if I occasionally steal an idea or two from what you've already heard. But what my purpose is very simple. It's to help equip you enter the debate articulately. And so I'm going to go through some of the basic arguments that I consider important on this question: has science buried God? And the first thing to realize is that the idea that science on the one side and God on the other side are essentially at war is dangerously false. It's easy to prove that. Last year's Nobel Prize was won by a Scotsman, Peter Higgs. He's an atheist. A few years ago, an American won it, William Phillips, and he's an evangelical Christian. And that ought to be enough, but it isn't, unfortunately, to show people that what the difference between those two men is not their commitment to science. They both won the Nobel Prize for Physics. The difference lies in their worldviews. One's a Christian and the other an atheist. So what we're dealing with in our culture is a worldview conflict, and it's been with us for centuries, certainly since the ancient Greeks. And you can see that if you ask one of the basic worldview questions: what is the nature of ultimate reality? What is the really real? And the atomists like Democritus and Leucippus thought the really real were atoms, the things that couldn't be cut, and empty space. And as the atoms cascaded through empty space, they formed galaxies, worlds, life, and the mind. There were others like Socrates and Plato and Aristotle who said, no, there's more to it. There's transcendence. There are the gods, or there is God. And so coming up into the contemporary academy, there are two diametrically opposed worldviews, explanations or beliefs about the nature of ultimate reality. And there are various variations in between. But it helps to discuss the polarized situation, because the polarized situation is the one we most encounter. So on the one hand, materialism, on the other hand, theism, in my case, Christian theism. They are opposed as worldviews, but the crucial thing to realize is there are scientists on both sides. So the key question is this: where does science fit? Does it point towards materialism or naturalism? Or does it point towards theism, or is it completely neutral? And it's a matter of evidence. As a mathematician, I want to make a point that is very important now. We do not get proof in the mathematical sense in anything other than in my discipline of pure mathematics, where our logical proof is based on the assumptions of clear-cut axioms, a process of accepted logic that leads to definitive conclusions. You do not get that in any other branch of science, and you do not get it in real life. And the trouble is, the word proof has two meanings, and we confuse them. There's the proof in the sense of beyond reasonable doubt, which is the ordinary one in every other science apart from mathematics and in everyday life. That, of course, does not mean that we cannot have certainty. I have no way of proving to you that my wife, who's been with me for 46 years, loves me. I can't prove it to you mathematically. But I'd stake my life on it because I've had 46 years of evidence for it. And hold that image in your mind, because I'm going to have things to say about the nature of faith and commitment which lies behind what we are talking about. So the first point, and it's been made twice already, and it's worth making a third time, is this: that science in the modern sense exploded in the 16th and 17th centuries with people like Galileo, Kepler, Newton, Pascal, and then later Boyle, Faraday, and so on, and Clerk Maxwell. That is an astonishing historical fact, because Alfred North Whitehead, the great North American philosopher of science, says in 1500 Europe knew less than Archimedes, who died in 212 BC, knew less than Archimedes. And yet by 1700 Newton's Principia Mathematica had been written. The reason he gave for that is this: it must come from the medieval insistence on the rationality of God, conceived as with the personal energy of Jehovah and the rationality of a Greek philosopher, the impress on the European mind arising from the unquestioned faith of centuries. And C.S. Lewis, reflecting on this, said, men became scientific because they expected law in nature, and they expected law in nature because they believed in a lawgiver. That is, it was faith in God, the theistic worldview, that gave us modern science. And that's a very powerful reason for me, not being remotely embarrassed to call myself both a Christian and a scientist, because Christianity gave me my subject. Now, we need to just be a little bit careful here, because people like Richard Dawkins, and he pointed it out to me anyway, he said, but half a minute, everybody believed in God in those days. And so it's not surprising that Christianity arose. Science arose from a Christian base. And I pointed out, everybody in what part of the world? You're talking about the West. But the East, China, for instance. And the interesting thing about China is that Joseph Needham of Cambridge, who was a brilliant scientist and a sinologist, spoke and wrote fluent Chinese and wrote the standard history of Chinese technology. Being a neo-Marxist, he tried for years to explain the lack of the development of abstract science in the modern sense in the Chinese culture. There was technology, there was fireworks and printing and so on, but no abstract science. And in the end, he decided that the only difference he could find was that the Chinese lacked the concept of a single creator who had created a universe to run on rational laws. So you can test it from the other side as well. And leading scientists like the Nobel Prize winner Melvin Calvin says the monotheistic view seems to be the historical foundation for modern science. Now, these ideas are worth pursuing in considerable detail because, you see, it wasn't simply belief in a creator, a rational creator, that stimulated science. It was belief in a contingent universe. That is, God could do it any way he liked. So if you want to find out, you go and look. And my colleague, Peter Harrison, who held the second chair of Science and Religion at Oxford, goes even further. He said it wasn't simply Christianity that gave birth to modern science. It was actually a contribution, at least in part, of the new way of studying Scripture that was brought to bear by the Reformers. That is, instead of interpreting Scripture in allegorical ways, they went to see what the text actually said. And the point Harrison makes is, taking that over into the study of the natural world gave us modern science. Now that creates, for many people today, an immense problem. Why is it, if Christianity stimulated science, people now say that you cannot possibly be a Christian and an intellectual? Choose between science and God, says Stephen Hawking. And what I want to analyze for you tonight is why that change has occurred, and to help you analyze it with a series of arguments that are accessible to anybody who can think, so that you can enter into the debate as well. Now, of course, some of the argument these days is carried by rhetoric. If someone like Stephen Hawking says God is a delusion like Santa Claus, everybody listens. One of the reasons I wrote a book about God and Stephen Hawking was getting a letter from a young Christian in Northern Ireland who'd seen a press release as he drove past the gas station and said, Stephen Hawking says there is no God. And he said, I started to shake. He said, if this man who's at the top of science in the world says there's no God, what can I do? And it was that prompted me to write an article in the newspaper and then a book. Assertion that there is no God, of course, is not proof that there isn't a God. And one of the things we need to learn, it's a very simple thing, is that statements by scientists are not always statements of science. Statements by scientists are not always statements of science. We've heard, I think twice, but let's hear it again. Carl Sagan, the cosmos is all that is, ever was, or ever shall be. That's a statement by a scientist, but it's not a statement of science. Not at all. It's a statement of his belief system, which is atheistic, as you see. Now, it is very common. I did 2 debates in the Netherlands in the last 2 weeks. One with a professor of physics and the other with a postmodern sociologist. And I was quite amused at the fact that one of the main arguments they brought against me was that God is like Santa Claus. Well, I said to the audience, well, let me put it to you. Have you ever met an adult who came to believe in Santa Claus? I've met many hundreds of adults who've come to believe in God. So don't be foolish and naive and put God into the same category as Santa Claus. You see, one of the arguments that comes powering in, and it's behind the title of Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, is the argument from psychology. Used as a branch of science, it's the old Freudian argument that God is a kind of wish fulfillment, a projection of our desire to have a father figure in the sky, pie in the sky when you die, that kind of thing. Well, when you meet an argument like that, and you're not a psychologist, and I'm not, what do? Now, here's a very important principle. I'm a mathematician. So, Dawkins is an ethnologist. He's not a psychologist either. So if I want to know about delusion, I'm going to consult a psychiatrist. So I did. Dawkins didn't, quite clearly. Because Andrew Sims, the past president of the Royal College of Psychiatrists in Britain, who's written a book, by the way, very interesting book called Is Faith a Delusion?, comes to the conclusion that it isn't. And he points out that it is a very unkind thing at the simplest level to suggest to people that faith is a delusion, because for many people who have problems with their minds, their faith in God is the one anchor they have to reality. Andrew Sims says the content, of course, of belief can be a delusion, but not in the Christian case. And you see, one of Germany's leading psychiatrists who writes very wittily, he's called Manfred Lutz, and he's written a book called Eine kleine Geschichte des Größten, a brief history of the Great One. And he says, of course, if there's no God, then Freud gives you a wonderful argument why religion is a wish fulfillment, if there's no God. Of course, if there is a God, Freud's argument is equally powerful, showing you that atheism is a delusion. The desire never to have to meet God. Let me give you a little tip. It's worth always, when you meet a new argument, reversing it and seeing if, when you reverse it, it reveals something. And of course, this reveals everything. And Lutz, who's one of the top psychiatrists in Germany, says, as to the question whether there's a God or not, neither Freud, Jung, or Frankl can help you the slightest bit. You'll have to look elsewhere. I mean, let me put it this way. Stephen Hawking was interviewed, and he was asked what he thought of religion. And he said, well, religion's a fairy story for people afraid of the dark. I was asked to respond, so I said atheism is a fairy story for people afraid of the light. Now, the fact that you clapped shows you didn't understand the argument. Because I was saying these kinds of statements prove nothing. You see, but you can give a one-liner in either direction. We have to go deeper into it to find out what's going on. So, number one, be careful of statements by scientists that aren't science. Number two, when I was younger, and I used to be younger, I believe, but I've forgotten it so long ago. When I talked to people about God, I could expect them to understand what I was talking about. No longer. I think one of the major problems in this whole debate is confusion about the nature and identity of God. It is confusion about science, and we'll come to that in a moment, but the nature and identity of God. You see, our title is, Has Science Buried God? Well, science has actually buried quite a few gods. Let me talk to you about them. I was debating in Oxford last year, the God debate. We have one every year. We dress up in dinner suits, and there are three on each side. It's a great parliament. You can see it online, actually. And I was facing three atheists, plus Richard Dawkins, who was sitting in a row behind them, but he didn't take part. So Michael Shermer, whom you probably know as the editor of Skeptic magazine, he took the lead, he pointed at me, and he said, you are an atheist with respect to Artemis, Baal. And he went rather boringly through the alphabet at much too great length until he ended up telling me I was an atheist with respect to Zeus. So I said, ladies and gentlemen, I confess it straight away. I am an Zeusist. And I'm an Wotanist, I'm an Artemist, and all the rest. And then he delivered the punchline with a great grin. He said, we just go one God further. And I thought, how utterly childish and naive. Doesn't he know anything about the Greek gods? Apparently not. But then I'm interested in the ancient gods because they form a background to both the Old Testament and the New. The Babylonian gods in the Old, and the Assyrian and the Greek and Roman gods in the New Testament. When you read serious scholars talking about the ancient gods, someone like Werner Jaeger of Oxford, they make a very powerful point. They said there's a profound difference between the God of the Bible and the gods of the ancient world, all of them. And the difference is this. The gods of the ancient world are, to quote Jaeger, descended from the heaven and earth. They are products of the original chaos. The God of the Bible created the heavens and the earth. So apparently Michael Shermer doesn't see the point. But it's more serious than that, you see. Because if God, as they think, is like a Greek god, that explains so much to me. You see, the Greek gods, well, did you hear the thunder this afternoon? Yes, we heard the thunder. Now, I presume you have a physics department. If you came into Patrick Henry College believing that there was a god of thunder, I expect you were disabused in a few elementary lessons on atmospheric physics. Temperature gradients, static electricity, vibrations through the atmosphere, all the rest of it. Exit the god by doing science. Now, here's the key thing. Many people in the world today are convinced that Christians believe in a God like that. That is a God of the gaps. I can't explain it, therefore God did it. Now follow me carefully. The implications of this are huge. You see, if you believe in a God who's simply a placeholder until science comes in with an explanation, God of thunder to atmospheric physics, if you believe in a God like that, you have to choose between science and God, because that is the way you have defined God. Have you got that? Our concept of God is crucial. And the God of the Bible is not the God of the bits of the universe I don't understand. He's the God of the entire universe, the bits you understand and the bits you don't. That is immensely important. Otherwise, we'll be constantly shooting past each other. And it only occurred to me in the last couple of years that this was going on. I would meet people and they said, well, you believe in God, and it's a God of the gaps you believe in. Once science closes that area, you'll have no God to believe in. Now, that's the difference between the first holder of Isaac Newton's chair and the most recent one, Isaac Newton himself and Stephen Hawking. Because, you see, when Isaac Newton discovered his law of gravity, what was his reaction to it? I've got a law, therefore I don't need God. Of course not. He said, what a marvelous God to do it that way. And he wrote the most brilliant book in the history of science, expressing explicitly the hope that a thinking person would come to believe in a deity because of it. Now think. The logic of this is so simple. I find kids can understand it, but university professors have difficulty with it. And it's this. The more you understand engineering, the more you can admire a genius who invented the turbofan jet, not the less. The more you understand of art, the more you can admire the genius of a Rembrandt, not the less. And the more you understand of how the universe works, the more you can admire the God who did it that way. I was on our national radio a week ago. They rang me up and they said, Professor Lennox, we want you to go head-to-head with a physicist from the Royal Society. And what do you make of this bit of research that seems to give evidence for the existence of gravity waves through the polarization of light detected by the South Polar Observatory? Does it affect your faith? Oh, I said, of course it does. Isn't it marvelous to know God can do so much in 10 to the minus 35 seconds? But it wasn't the answer they expected. The more we understand, the more we can admire the genius of the God that did it that way. Now, we need to think about this seriously, ladies and gentlemen, because some Christians can inadvertently give the impression they believe in a God of gaps. They haven't yet got into their heads what Psalm 19 says, the heavens declare the glory of God. Not just the bits we don't understand, but the whole lot of it. Our God does not diminish by scientific discovery. He is enhanced by true science, because we are following, as Kepler put it, God's fingerprints after him. Now, I'm going to give you an analogy because analogies are very helpful. I was in West Point 2 nights ago. That was very interesting. I'm glad the 800 or 900 army people in front of me weren't armed. So I said to them, have you all heard of an Abrams tank? Oh, yes, they'd heard of an Abrams tank. And I said, who designed the Abrams tank? Well, they didn't know, and nobody knows. It's probably a secret. So I said, let's imagine that General Abrams designed it himself. What would you think of a person who'd studied Abrams tanks for 20 years and came to you and said, you know, I can't find General Abrams anywhere. I've studied the engine, I've studied the track-laying equipment, I've studied the radar, I've studied the steering mechanisms, and I can't find General Abrams anywhere. So clearly he's a myth. What would you think of that argument? That's exactly the argument that's being used, you know. General Abrams is everywhere to be found. That is his handiwork and his ideas. He himself is not the mechanism or the law by which the machine works. He's the agent who designed it. Now, this is very elementary, but you see, the word explanation has been tossed around this afternoon several times. It is one of the most important words in this whole debate, to understand what we mean by explanation. So number one was confusion about delusion. Number two was confusion about the nature of God. Number three now is confusion about the nature of scientific explanation. Just a few words about a very dangerous development in our contemporary Western culture. We call it scientism. That is the idea that science is the only way to truth. Riding off the back of the success of science in producing such marvelous technology that you're all twittering and tweeting and twerping and all the kinds of things. You know, when I was young, I was told these were things that birds did. But anyway, all this technology that's a spin-off, it's so powerful, isn't it, that people are beginning to think that science is the only way to truth. That is highly dangerous and obviously false. First of all, if science is the only way to truth, you have to forthwith close half the faculties in this college, because there's history and art and literature and so on. But secondly, it's not logical. Logical analysis is my stock and trade, and sometimes useful, you know, being a mathematician. Science is the only way to truth. What about that statement? Is that a statement of science? No. It's a statement about science. So if it's not a statement of science and science is the only way to truth, that statement cannot be true, so therefore it's false if it's true. Have you got it? No, it's far too late at night for logic, so we'll have to leave that. The correlative danger is that people regard science as coextensive with rationality. And now let's come to explanation, having dealt with that. What does it mean to say science explains? The law of gravity explains. What does it explain? Well, it gives us a wonderful equation that we can use to put people on the moon without even using Einstein's refinements. It does that. Brilliant. But you know what it doesn't do? It doesn't explain what gravity is. Nobody yet knows what gravity is. And yet the moment the words science explains are used, people think that's it, that's a complete explanation. It isn't, not even within science itself. Richard Feynman, brilliant Nobel Prize-winning physicist, stratospheric in his intellect. He could see this very clearly. He said, don't let anybody fool you. Nobody knows what energy is. Oh, we can measure it. We've got laws of conservation of energy, but we don't know what it is. So explanation is limited even within science itself. So when people say science explains, you need to be careful what they say. And it was Wittgenstein, the famous philosopher, he got it dead right. He said this: the greatest deception of modernism is the idea that the laws of nature explain the phenomena of nature. They do not. They describe regularities, they enable us to make powerful predictions, but they do not tell us what the things are that they describe. So that restricts things. Now, I'm passionate about science, but as Sir Peter Medawar, a brilliant scientist, said long ago, the best way to do disservice to science is to suggest that it can answer every question, when its power actually depends on its narrowing its range of questions. Why is the kettle boiling? Well, why is the kettle boiling? It's boiling because somebody shoved a Bunsen burner under it. The heat energy is being transformed through the kettle bottom into the water, and the water is vibrating faster and faster and faster and faster, and it's got to nearly 100 degrees centigrade, and there's a transformation occurring. That's it. Nonsense. It's boiling because I want a cup of tea. I'm glad you laugh, ladies and gentlemen. What you've just heard is two kinds of explanation. A how explanation, or a why of function, without going immediately direct back to all Aristotle's very interesting categories, and a purpose explanation, a final cause, I want a cup of tea. And we are used that watching that kettle boil, we need both levels of explanation to paint a complete picture. Now, that can help you to see what is happening when Vern and Jay were talking about science restricting the level of inquiry. And people think explanation, scientific explanation, that's full explanation. It rarely is, even within its own parameters. But often it's simply answering the how questions or the why questions of function, and it's not answering the why questions of purpose. God as an explanation for the universe doesn't compete with science any more than General Abrams competes with science as an explanation for the Abrams tank. You can see that, can't you? They are complementary explanations. They don't conflict, they don't compete. Nobody would even dream of thinking it. And yet, you've got to choose between God and science. It shows they don't even begin to understand what's going on. It's a smokescreen. And once you discover that there are different levels of explanation, it frees you of a lot of problems in that direction. But now, before we leave explanation, you'll want to ask, so I'll ask it for you. You'll want to ask, but look here, isn't there a fundamental difficulty here? You see, I've been taught at school that an explanation should be simpler than the thing you're explaining. That's one thing. The other thing is this: if you introduce God, who seems to be much more complex than the things you're explaining, if you introduce God in any case as an explanation of anything at any level, surely that raises a logical question. If you believe God created the universe, then logically you've got to ask who created God, haven't you? And then you've got to ask who created the creator that created the creator that created the creator that, and so on, ad nauseam. So the whole thing's nonsense, so let's forget it and go and do something serious like playing football. You've heard that argument. Do you know it's the core argument of Dawkins' book, The God Delusion? I couldn't believe it when I came across it. I had to read it several times. And when I then got it from Peter Singer in Australia, he's a philosopher after all, and Dawkins isn't. Who created the creator? Think about it. You see, this is what philosophers call a complex question. It hides assumptions. Let me abstract from it. Who or what created X? What does that assume? It assumes X was created. So if I say who created God, I'm assuming in the question that God was created. But what if he wasn't? And the Bible says he wasn't. Well, then the question doesn't even apply. Do you see that? And so many people have been knocked for six by reading this. And it's the simplest thing to see that the question doesn't even apply. John 1 has very interesting things to say about this. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things, now let me translate it a little bit more accurately. All things came to be through him. Were made is the usual translation. Of course it's true, but it's much more powerful than that. All things came to be through him, but then there's a second clause. I wonder if you ever wondered what it means. And without him, nothing came to be that came to be. Why is that second clause there? Without him, nothing came to be that came to be. Now, the Greeks were very interested at that time in things that came to be. They could see the people came to be. Did the universe come to be? Did the gods come to be, etc.? Or was there anything that did not come to be? And of course, John's answer, in the beginning, the Word was, in the existential sense. He existed eternally. The universe came to be. But now go back to that little phrase. Without him, nothing came to be that came to be. So if you suggest that God was created, you mean he came to be. But then John will tell you, without him, nothing came to be that came to be. So God is responsible for his own existence, which of course is nonsensical. Do you see that? It's too late for logic, isn't it? But there we are. It is immensely important, ladies and gentlemen, to realize that these scriptures with which we are very familiar are utterly profound and going to the heart of this business. The biblical claim is God never came to be. And so asking who created the Creator is quite frankly silly. But you see, there's a sting in the question. And when Dawkins put it to me, I said to him, Richard, you think the question makes sense. It does, of course, of created things. So let me put the question to you. You believe the universe created you. So tell me, who created your Creator? I've waited 7 years and got no answer. You see, what that question really is philosophically, it's a question about ultimate reality. Do the questions go backwards forever? No, they don't. Not on either side. Not with most people I know. For many of my atheist friends, the multiverse, the universe, mass energy is the ultimate reality. For me, God is the ultimate reality. He's eternal. He never came to be. So the real question is not, is there an ultimate reality, but which reality is ultimate? And what makes most sense as an ultimate reality? So that's just a little bit about that. Now let's come to the next confusion. And that's the confusion about the nature of faith. Think of our title today. Science and faith. What does that mean? Science is here and faith is there. What do you mean by faith? Well, I know what you mean by faith. You mean faith in God. But it would be very wise to say so. I'll tell you why. Because you see, I could give you a lecture on science and faith that doesn't mention God. Because faith is an essential ingredient of science. I'll come to that in a minute. And it's extremely important that we don't fall in with the atheists who think there's science here, that's rationality, and there's faith here, that's believing where there's no evidence, and that's religion. That is a very dangerous confusion. So let's analyze it just a little bit. You see, the Oxford English Dictionary has remained moderately sensible in that it defines faith going back to its Latin derivation, fides, trust, reliability, fidelity, and I'm quoting here, that which produces belief, evidence, token, pledge, engagement, trust in its objective aspect, and so on. Webster's dictionary has a new edition, new thing put in. Faith, noun, believing where there's no evidence. It's in the dictionary now, ladies and gentlemen. That's the atheist definition. That's blind faith, believing where there's no evidence. But they have very cleverly convinced millions of people that the word faith means believing where there's no evidence. Well, you know that isn't true. Well, when the banking crisis hit, it was partly true, wasn't it? Some people believed the banks, didn't they? And then there was a crash, and the markets froze. And what happened? It was a very difficult period before trust could be regained because the evidence was not there. Isn't that right? Every one of us, because we're all affected by it, knows exactly what evidence-based faith is, don't we? Now, it is very important that we're clear about this. Is our Christian faith blind, or is it evidence-based? And I ask you, is your faith in your husband blind or evidence-based? You can answer that immediately, of course. You see, this is so important. A.C. Grayling is a leading British philosopher who ought to know better, but he tries to read the Bible occasionally, but it's clear that he doesn't read it very carefully. So he tries to expound John chapter 20. It's always interesting watching atheist philosophers expound Scripture. So he comes to doubting Thomas, and he writes in his book, you see, of course the Christian faith is blind. Jesus expects us to believe without any evidence. So he cites this verse, and you all know it. When Thomas came to the Lord and eventually worshipped him, Jesus said to him, because you've seen, you've believed. Blessed rather are those who have not seen, but have believed. There you are, says Grayling. Jesus wants faith without evidence. Can the man not read? What did Jesus say? Because you've had no evidence, you've believed? No. Because you've seen, you've believed. Blessed are those who have had no evidence. No. Blessed are those who have not seen but believed. Seeing is only one part of evidence. There's not a person in this room who has seen Jesus like Thomas saw him. Are we therefore believing because there's no evidence? Now here's the supreme irony. The very next statement in John's Gospel is this. Many other signs Jesus did in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written in order that you might believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that believing you might have life in his name. In other words, here's a whole book full of evidence upon which faith can be rested. I wish they took our book as seriously as we take theirs. Intellectual honesty demands that we read their arguments, and I try to take them very seriously. But this is a mockery, an elementary failure to read what the text actually says. The wonderful thing is our faith in Christ is anchored in history. The early apostles preached the resurrection as a fact that could be investigated and experiences that could be had to support and buttress that faith. Of course, when I think of my wife, when I asked her to marry me about 100 years ago or whenever it was, I didn't know everything about her. No, and she didn't know everything about me. But I had enough evidence to make the commitment. And it grew. And God will sometimes ask us, you know, to trust him where there's no immediate evidence for that particular thing. But that doesn't mean there's no evidence at all. We've got the track record of our experience of God up to that point, and therefore we can trust him. Doesn't that make sense? Let's get it utterly clear, because the world is getting the impression that we close our eyes, we take a leap of faith into the dark, we say goodbye to our intellect. All of those are totally wrong and dangerously wrong. Blind faith is the kind of faith that causes young men to drive jet aircraft into tall buildings, and it's very dangerous. Thank God he's given us evidence upon which our faith can be based. But now come to the other side a bit. You see, putting science over here and faith over there gives people the impression that faith has nothing to do with science, but it has. It's been hinted at already. Einstein said that he couldn't imagine a scientist without that faith, as he called it. Now, he didn't mean faith in God. He meant the faith without which science cannot be done. And that's the faith in the mathematical intelligibility of the universe. It's utterly logical, isn't it? I would never do any science if I didn't believe that the universe was intelligible, at least in part. And you see, that's why science rose, because Christianity gave those early scientists a base for believing that science could be done. And those that read Genesis as far as chapter 2 discovered that God commanded science anyway. he told humans to name the animals, and taxonomy is the foundation discipline of every science. In fact, every academic discipline. So God is pro-science, not anti-science. But that's just a by-the-by remark. All scientists have faith. Let me illustrate just how far we've got. When I debated Peter Singer in Australia, I told the audience, as I always do in these things, I'm honest, I said my parents are Christian, my grandparents are Christian, and I grew up in Northern Ireland, and my parents were not sectarian, which was remarkable, and what was even more remarkable, they allowed me to think. So Peter Singer comes on the platform and he said, well, there you are, you see, this is the biggest argument there is against religion. People remain in the religion in which they grew up, in the faith in which they grew up. And I thought, this is going to be great fun. So when he came back and I had a chance to say something, I said, Peter, let's balance this up a bit, could we? Do you mind if I ask you, since you've talked about my parents, tell me, were your parents atheists? He said, yes, they were. Oh, I said, so you've stayed in the faith in which you were brought up? Oh, but he said, it isn't a faith. I said, Peter, I'm really sorry. I was under the impression you believed it. That is staggering, ladies and gentlemen. He didn't realize his atheism is a belief system because he swallowed this science here, faith here mythology. And Hitchens got himself into such a twist. If you have to have faith to believe something, that lessens the probability that there's something exists. I said, Christopher, do you believe you exist? Because if you have to have faith to believe you exist, that lessens the probability that you do. Dawkins, atheists have no faith. Hitchens, our beliefs are not a belief. Where's all that coming from? It's coming from this totally false redefinition of the concept of faith and pitching it against science and rationality. We mustn't give in to it, ladies and gentlemen. If you want to talk about science and faith, please add the two words faith in God. Because faith is essential to every life activity there is. And of course we know that. So Einstein said he couldn't imagine a scientist without that faith. But now it gets really interesting. Because I have reasons for trusting, at least in part, my mind to do science. Because I believe, you see, that my mind is traceable back to a rational God, as is the universe out there. But what about my atheist friends? I find this a very interesting little bit of question and answer with my friends. I say to them, tell me, what is your mind? Oh, well, it's the brain. There's a book going around in Holland at the moment that I had to address. You are your brain. It's reductionism. You are your brain. Nothing but your brain. Oh, I said. And what's your brain? Well, it's the end product of a mindless, unguided process. I said, really? And you trust it to do science? I mean, if you knew that your computer was the end product of an unguided, mindless process, would you trust it? Not for a minute. And I put it to the army guys. I said, if you were issued tomorrow with a new weapon and told you've got to be battle ready at 1400 hours, and the general came in and said, by the way, guys, just to tell you, this is a very up-to-date weapon, and it's been produced by a mindless, unguided process. Good luck, boys. Well, they got the point. But ladies and gentlemen, this is irrationality. Now, this is very important, actually, because it's my major ground for rejecting atheism. It's got nothing to do with my Christianity whatsoever. It's to do with my science. That atheism is seen to undermine the validity of the rationality that we need to trust to do science. And ironically, Darwin saw it. With me, he wrote, the horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of man's mind, which has been developed from the mind of the lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. And John Gray, who's an atheist, continues, modern humanism is the faith, notice, that through science humankind can know the truth and so be free. But if Darwin's theory of natural selection is true, this is impossible. This is an atheist writing. The human mind serves evolutionary success, not truth. This reduction of thought to physics and chemistry destroys thought itself. John Polkinghorne, who taught me quantum physics at Cambridge, says that this thesis is suicidal. Not only does it relegate our experiences of beauty, moral obligation, religious encounter to the epiphenomenal scrap heap, it destroys rationality. Thought is replaced by electrochemical events. Two such events cannot confront each other in rational discourse. They are neither right nor wrong. They simply happen. The very assertions of the reductionist himself are nothing but blips in the neural network of his brain. Quite frankly, that cannot be right, and none of us believes it so. And Alvin Planting has updated this argument. And if you want to read about it, do read his book, Where the Problem Really Lies, a recent book. He says if Dawkins is right, that we are the product of mindless, unguided natural processes, then Dawkins has given us strong reason to doubt the reliability of human cognitive faculties, and therefore inevitably to doubt the validity of any belief that they produce, including Dawkins' own science and his atheism. His biology and his belief in naturalism would therefore appear to be at war with each other in a conflict that has nothing to do with God. And then the bombshell hit. And you can see in cyberspace, not now, but later, you can see in cyberspace, the effect of Thomas Nagel's book. He's one of the top philosophers in this country. He's an atheist. He doesn't want there to be a God. And he says this: if the mental is not itself merely physical, it cannot be fully explained by physical science. Evolutionary naturalism implies that we shouldn't take any of our convictions seriously, including the scientific world picture on which evolutionary naturalism itself depends. How do you get that across to people? Well, this is the way I do it. You may have heard this before, but it won't damage you, like the chicken won't damage you if you have it again tomorrow. In my college, we have dinners every Thursday night by candlelit. They're very nice, but the only snag sometimes is you can't choose who you sit beside. It's prescribed. So I found myself beside a brilliant biochemist who heads up one of the great biochemistry labs. And he asked me what I did, which is the usual Oxford thing, not who am I, but what I do, that's it. You're defined by what you do. So I said, I'm a pure mathematician. Oh, he said, how boring. And he meant it. So I tried to backtrack a bit, and I said, well, I tried to make up for that. I know my subject's difficult and sociably unacceptable to some people, including you, obviously. But I tried to make up for it by being interested in the big questions of life. He said, like what? Well, like the status of the universe. Is it created or not? Or the status of human life. Is it made in the image of God or not? Oh, he said, it's far worse than I thought. He said, listen, we're going to have a hard time this evening because I'm a reductionist, I'm an atheist, we have nothing to talk about, and that's it. Oh, but I said, we're going to have a marvelous time. He said, are we? I said, yes. I said, you're a reductionist. Well, I said, I know at least 3 kinds of reductionists. Which kind are you? So I helped him out, and I said, I'm like you. I'm a methodological reductionist. I see a big problem, split it into little problems, study the little problems, get insight on them, and hope it solves the big problem. Yes, he said, I do that too. Well, I said, we can agree at that at least, can't we? But he said, I don't mean that. I said, I know you don't. You're an ontological reductionist. Ontos, being. You believe that everything can be reduced to physics and chemistry. He said, that's right. So I said, well, why don't we do an experiment? He said, what? Here at the dinner table? I said, yes, this is Oxford. So he said, what's the experiment? I picked up the menu and showed it to him. Roast chicken. Same again. You'll remember it tonight, won't you? Roast chicken. So he said, what's the problem? Well, I said, look at this. R-O-A-S-T. Yes, he said, I can read that. It's roast. Oh, I said, you can read that. So those marks on the paper carry a semiotic, a meaning. Yes, he said, that's right. And you're a reductionist. Yes, he said, I'm a reductionist. Okay, I said, have a go at this. You explain to me the semiotics of those letters in terms of the physics and chemistry of the paper and ink. And his wife was beside him, and she said rather too loudly, she said, "Get out of that if you can." But you know, he didn't try. His answer stunned me. He said, John, he was getting friendly now. He said, for 40 years I've gone into my laboratory here in Oxford thinking that could be done. Oh, that was stunning. He said, it can't be done. It's not within the explanatory power of physics and chemistry to explain the meaning of those words. And I nearly said to him, but I didn't because I was too kind. So you're postulating an author of the gaps, are you? Now, follow this carefully because this is actually quite serious. If I said you need to introduce an author into that gap, would you feel that was wrong or right? This is not a gap like thunder, God of thunder going when science explains. This is a gap that is opened by science because the explanatory power of physics and chemistry cannot deal with semiotics and meaning for the very simple reason that they're immaterial. He recognized that with ROAST. It's 5 letters, isn't it? And now comes the interesting thing. He goes into his lab and he looks down a microscope. Well, it's a microscope that hasn't been invented yet, but you know what I mean. And he sees a double helix unraveling. And he sees it spitting off letters A, C, G, A, A, T, Z, G, T, T, A, G, A, A. And it goes on and on and on. And I ask him, how many of those are there? 3.5 billion. And what are they? They're codons. Oh, they code for something, do they? Yeah, they code for the proteins. Is the order important? Of course it is. It's like a computer program. So there's a semiotic dimension. Yes. Tell me what the ultimate origin of that is. Oh, chance and necessity. Pardon? Isn't it odd, ladies and gentlemen? There's not a man or woman in the world, if they see their name written in any medium whatsoever, that doesn't instantly intuit upwards to an intelligent input, however automatic the processes may have been to produce the piece of paper and the writing. And yet they can stare the longest word that we've ever discovered in the face and say chance and the laws of nature. I don't think so, ladies and gentlemen. Listen to Scripture as I stop. Which of the two worldviews makes sense? That's what's at stake, your worldview. What is ultimate reality? Is it the particles in empty space that eventually produce the cosmos and the mind and the idea of God because there is no God? Or is it this? In the beginning was the Word. The physicists are now realizing that information is not reducible to mass and energy. In the beginning was the Word. All things came to be through him. If the Bible is such a primitive book as many think it is, how did they know that 20 centuries ago, that information is the key? By faith we understand that the worlds were made by the Word of God. Genesis, and God said, and God said, and God said. The message is uniform and it is immensely intellectually powerful because it is telling us that the very root of our being is mind, is a creative mind of God, so that mind is primary and mass energy is derivative. The atheist view is that mass energy is primary and mind is derivative. I have no hesitation, both as a scientist and a Christian, of saying that the biblical view is infinitely to be preferred. Thank you very much.